What if I told you that the most dangerous force in the world isn't war, disease, or even hatred, but something far more subtle, something that lives inside every one of us? Picture this. A brilliant doctor, trained for decades, hesitates to act in an emergency because a nagging fear clouds their judgment. A devoted parent who would do anything for their child suddenly freezes when faced with a tough decision, paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice. A community leader, admired by all, pushes a divisive agenda, not out of malice, but because they're afraid of being ostracized by their peers. These aren't villains. They're not stupid or cruel. They're people like you and me, caught in the grip of something primal, something universal. Fear. It's not just an emotion. It's a force that rewires our brains, distorts our decisions, and reshapes the world in ways we rarely notice until it's too late. And here's the terrifying truth. Fear doesn't just hold you back, it can turn your best intentions into catastrophic mistakes. Let's set the stage with a story. In 1971, a group of college students at Stanford University walked into a basement for what they thought was a simple psychology experiment. They were divided into prisoners and guards, a role-playing exercise meant to last 2 weeks. But within days, the guards became abusive, the prisoners broke down, and the experiment spiraled into chaos. Why? Because fear of losing control, of defying authority, of stepping out of line, transformed ordinary, kind-hearted students into something unrecognizable. This was the Stanford prison experiment, and it wasn't about evil or stupidity. It was about how fear can hijack even the best of us. Now, I want you to pause and think. Have you ever made a choice, not because it was right, but because you were afraid of what might happen if you didn't? Maybe you stayed silent when you saw something wrong, afraid of rocking the boat. Maybe you went along with a group decision, even though your gut screamed it was a mistake. Keep that moment in mind as we dive into a theory so unsettling, so profound, that it might just change the way you see yourself and the world around you. This is the story of fear, not as a fleeting feeling, but as a force that has shaped history, toppled civilizations, and continues to manipulate us in ways we're only beginning to understand. And at the heart of this story is a man who saw it all unfold firsthand. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher who called fear the dizziness of freedom. His ideas, combined with modern science and historical lessons, reveal a truth we were never meant to hear. Fear doesn't just live in your mind. It's a weapon, a system, and a trap. But there's hope. By understanding fear, we can learn to fight it, reclaim our freedom, and build a better world. Let's travel back to 19th century Denmark, where a quiet, introspective man named Søren Kierkegaard was wrestling with questions that would echo through the ages. Born in 1813, Kierkegaard wasn't your typical philosopher. He didn't sit in grand halls debating abstract theories. Instead, he wandered the streets of Copenhagen, scribbling in notebooks, haunted by a question that consumed him. Why do people, even the most thoughtful, make choices that betray their own values? Kierkegaard lived in a time of rigid social norms and religious dogma, but he saw something deeper at work. In his book, The Concept of Anxiety, he described fear, or what he called angst, as more than just a reaction to danger. For Kierkegaard, fear was the overwhelming sensation of standing at the edge of freedom, knowing you have the power to choose, but terrified of what those choices might cost. He wrote, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Imagine standing on a cliff, looking down at an endless abyss. The fear isn't just about falling, it's about realizing you could choose to jump." That's the kind of fear Kierkegaard was talking about, the fear of our own potential, our own responsibility. Now, let's fast forward to a moment that proves Kierkegaard's point. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit. Millions lost their homes, jobs, and savings. But here's the kicker. The crisis wasn't caused by a single villain or a freak accident. It was fueled by thousands of decisions, by bankers, regulators, and ordinary investors, who were all gripped by fear. Fear of missing out on profits, fear of being left behind in a booming market, fear of saying no when everyone else was saying yes. These were smart, educated people, yet their fear-driven choices brought the world to its knees. Kierkegaard would have nodded grimly from his grave. This wasn't about greed alone, it was about fear masquerading as ambition. Kierkegaard's insight was revolutionary because he didn't see fear as a personal failing. He saw it as a universal condition amplified by the systems around us. He argued that fear thrives in moments of uncertainty, when we're faced with choices that have no clear right or wrong. And when fear takes hold, we don't just freeze, we surrender our ability to think, to question, to act with courage. Instead, we cling to what's familiar, what's safe, what everyone else is doing. Sound familiar? It should. Because this isn't just a 19th century problem, it's the story of our lives today. Let's bring Kierkegaard's ideas into the 21st century with a dose of neuroscience. Your brain, that 3-pound marvel in your skull, is wired for survival. Millions of years ago, fear was your best friend. It kept your ancestors alive when a rustle in the bushes might have meant a saber-toothed cat. That's why your amygdala, the brain's fear center, lights up like a Christmas tree when you sense danger. It's fast, automatic, and doesn't bother with nuance. But here's the problem. The modern world isn't a jungle, and the threats we face aren't lions or tigers. They're complex, abstract, and often invisible. Things like economic uncertainty, social rejection, or the fear of being cancelled online. In 1998, neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux published groundbreaking research on the amygdala, showing how it hijacks your brain in moments of fear. When you're scared, your amygdala pumps out stress hormones like cortisol, shutting down the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, planning, and moral judgment. Ever wonder why you say things you regret in an argument? Or why you freeze up when you're put on the spot? That's your amygdala taking the wheel, and it's not interested in long-term consequences. It wants you to survive right now. But it gets worse. Modern systems exploit this wiring with ruthless precision. Take social media. In 2020, a study from the University of Oxford found that fear-driven content, posts about threats, conspiracies, or outrage, spreads 10 times faster than neutral or positive content. Why? Because fear grabs your attention, keeps you scrolling, and makes you click. Every time you see a headline screaming about the end of the world or a post warning about some vague danger, your amygdala perks up and the platform makes money. It's not an accident, it's a business model. Companies like Facebook and X know exactly how to weaponize your fear, turning your brain's survival instincts into their profit margins. And then there's group dynamics. In 1951, psychologist Solomon Asch ran experiments that showed how fear of social rejection can override your better judgment. Participants were asked to judge the length of a line, a simple task with an obvious answer. But when surrounded by a group giving the wrong answer, 75% of people conformed at least once, even when they knew they were wrong. Why? Because the fear of standing out, of being ostracized, was stronger than their trust in their own eyes. Now imagine that experiment on steroids, amplified by social media echo chambers where dissent feels like social suicide. That's the world we're living in. Let's zoom out and look at history through Kierkegaard's lens. Fear isn't just a personal struggle. It's a force that has shaped entire civilizations. Take the witch hunts of the 17th century. In Salem, Massachusetts, over 200 people were accused of witchcraft and 20 were executed. These weren't evil people driving the hysteria. They were farmers, ministers, and neighbors. Ordinary folks gripped by fear of the unknown, fear of the devil, fear of being seen as disloyal to their community. They believed they were protecting their families, their faith, their way of life. But fear turned their good intentions into a tragedy. Or consider the Cold War. In the 1950s, the Red Scare swept through America, fueled by fear of communism. Senator Joseph McCarthy led a witch hunt of his own, accusing thousands of Americans, teachers, actors, government workers, of being Soviet spies. Most had done nothing wrong, but fear of being labeled un-American silenced dissent and ruined lives. Again, this wasn't about evil masterminds. It was about fear amplifying uncertainty, turning rational people into pawns of paranoia. Fast forward to today, and the pattern repeats. During the COVID-19 pandemic, fear drove countless decisions, some life-saving, others disastrous. Governments locked down entire economies, often with incomplete data, driven by fear of public backlash. Individuals hoarded supplies, not out of greed, but out of fear of scarcity. And on social media, fear fueled misinformation about vaccines and treatments, shared not by idiots, but by doctors, engineers, and parents desperate for certainty in a chaotic world. Kierkegaard would have seen it all coming. Fear makes us crave simple answers, even when they're wrong. Here's where things get really unsettling. Fear doesn't just happen, it's cultivated. Our modern systems, economic, social, technological, are designed to keep us afraid. Why? Because fear is profitable. Politicians use fear to win votes, promising safety from whatever boogeyman is trending: immigrants, AI, climate change, you name it. Media outlets thrive on fear-driven clicks, with headlines like, "Is this the end of democracy?" or "The hidden danger in your drinking water." And corporations, they've mastered the art of fear-based marketing. Ever notice how ads for insurance, security systems, or even skincare play on your fear of loss, danger, or aging? But it's not just about money. Fear serves power. Kierkegaard warned that fear makes us cling to authority, even when it's leading us astray. In his time, it was the church and the state. Today, it's algorithms and influencers. A 2022 study from MIT showed that social media platforms amplify fear and division because they're designed to prioritize engagement over truth. The more afraid or angry you are, the more you interact, and the more data they collect to keep you hooked. It's a vicious cycle, and your brain is the battlefield. Economic systems play a role too. When you're working 2 jobs, drowning in debt, or worried about healthcare, your brain doesn't have the bandwidth to question the latest fear-mongering headline. This is what economists call cognitive load. A 2013 study from Harvard found that financial stress reduces cognitive performance, making it harder to think critically or make long-term decisions. In other words, when you're afraid for your survival, you're more likely to fall for quick fixes and simplistic narratives. Sound like a coincidence? It's not. Systems that keep you stressed and scared also keep you compliant. So, how do we fight back against a force that's wired into our brains and amplified by our systems? Kierkegaard believed the answer lies in embracing what he called the leap of faith. Not blind belief, but the courage to act despite uncertainty, to choose freedom over fear. Modern psychology backs him up. Researchers like Carol Dweck, who studies growth mindset, have shown that embracing uncertainty and failure as part of learning can rewire how we respond to fear. Instead of running from it, we can lean into it, using it as a signal to pause, reflect, and choose wisely. Here are some practical steps to reclaim your mind from fear's grip. 1. Practice cognitive friction. Every week, challenge one assumption you hold dear. Read a book, article, or post from someone who disagrees with you, not to argue, but to understand. This builds intellectual courage, the kind Kierkegaard lived by. 2. Pause before you react. When you feel fear creeping in, whether it's a scary headline or a heated argument, take 10 seconds to breathe. Ask yourself, is this fear talking or is this me? That pause can break the amygdala's spell. 3. Seek productive uncertainty. Instead of chasing certainty, embrace questions without easy answers. Ask, what evidence would change my mind? If you can't answer, your belief might be rooted in fear, not truth. 4. Curate your information diet. Unfollow accounts that thrive on fear and outrage. Follow sources that challenge you to think, not just feel. Your attention is your power. Use it wisely. 5. Say, I don't know. Admitting uncertainty isn't weakness, it's strength. In a world that rewards confident ignorance, humility is rebellion. But individual action isn't enough. We need structural changes to make courage easier. Imagine social media platforms required to label fear-driven content or disclose how their algorithms amplify anxiety. Picture public schools teaching media literacy from kindergarten, equipping kids to spot fear-mongering before it takes root. Envision economic policies that reduce financial stress, giving people the mental space to think critically. These aren't pipe dreams. They're choices we can demand from our leaders. Kierkegaard's warning about fear is chilling, but it's also empowering. If fear is a choice, however unconscious, we can choose differently. If it's amplified by systems, we can redesign those systems. Think of it like physical fitness. Overcoming fear takes practice, discipline, and sometimes discomfort. But every time you choose curiosity over panic, evidence over emotion, you're not just saving yourself, you're building a world where truth and courage can thrive. Let's end with a story. In 1989, a young Chinese student stood in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square. We don't know his name, but we know his courage. He wasn't fearless, nobody is. But he chose to act despite his fear, embodying Kierkegaard's leap of faith. That image of one person facing impossible odds reminds us that fear doesn't have to win. It's not about being unafraid, it's about refusing to let fear decide who you are. So here's my challenge to you. This week, find one fear that's holding you back. Maybe it's the fear of speaking up at work, questioning a belief, or admitting you're wrong. Spend 30 minutes exploring it, not to conquer it, but to understand it. Ask, what's the worst that could happen if I act despite this fear? Then take one small step. Share your story in the comments, not to brag, but to inspire someone else to do the same. Because here's the truth Kierkegaard left us with. Fear isn't just an emotion, it's a test. Every time you choose to think, to question, to act with courage, you're not just defying fear. You're defending the very possibility of human freedom. In a world that profits from our panic, choosing courage isn't just personal, it's revolutionary. What's one fear you're ready to face this week? Let's start a conversation. Share this video with someone who isn't afraid to think deeply, even when it's scary. Because in a world designed to keep us afraid, the simple act of choosing courage becomes the most powerful thing we can do.